"Are you Emma?" a tiny voice asked. He froze. He'd been sitting alone for 20 minutes pretending the blind date delay didn't sting. But now two little twin girls stood in front of him, holding hands, staring up like they already knew him. "My daddy's sorry he's late," one of them said. The other added, "He said you might leave, so we had to hurry." People around them turned. Someone whispered. The twins wrapped their arms around his legs like it was the most natural thing in the world. He felt heat crawl up his neck, confusion, embarrassment, and something deeper he didn't want to name. This wasn't just a ruined blind date. This was the kind of moment that poked straight into the scar he thought he'd buried years ago. And the worst part, he hadn't even met their father yet. He tried to steady his breathing, but the moment with the twins had already cracked something open inside him. His life didn't leave much room for surprises anymore. Most days were predictable, almost mechanical. Wake up early, handle work, check on his mother, pay bills, repeat. He'd built his routine like a shield, keeping anything uncertain far from his heart. It was safer that way, safer than hoping again. People thought he avoided dating because he was picky. The truth was simpler and heavier. His last relationship had ended with a text message that said, "I can't do this anymore," followed by silence so sharp it carved itself into him. Ever since then, he'd lived with a quiet fear disguised as caution. Every invitation felt like a trap waiting to repeat itself. Every delayed reply felt like the start of another goodbye. He'd agreed to this blind date only because a friend insisted it would break his cycle. But now, even that seemed like a mistake. A no-show date, followed by two children claiming him like they knew his name. It felt like life mocking him for trying again. And somewhere in the middle of this confusion was their father, a man he hadn't even met yet, but whose presence pressed on the story like an unanswered question. The twins had spoken about him with certainty, but their words didn't match the situation. A man who arrives late but sends his daughters ahead. A man who planned a date but didn't show up on time. The contradictions formed little cracks of doubt. He needed stability more than anything, steady emotions, steady people, steady ground. But now he was caught in a moment that felt anything but steady. He didn't know it yet, but this strange encounter was about to pull him out of his careful life in ways he couldn't walk away from. He didn't even hear the man approach. He only noticed the twins' sudden stillness, like they sensed someone behind them. Then a voice said, "I'm so sorry. I'm really, really sorry," and the father finally appeared. The protagonist turned, expecting someone arrogant or careless. Instead, he saw a man who looked like he'd sprinted through his own life to get here. Breath uneven, hands still shaking, words tripping over each other. "Please don't leave," the man said. This was supposed to go differently. People were watching again. Not loudly, not rudely, but enough to make the protagonist feel pinned in place. Enough to make turning away feel like a scene. The man crouched down to the twins first. "You two shouldn't have run off like that," he whispered. But there was no anger in it, just fear disguised as scolding. The girls didn't answer. They just pressed closer to the protagonist, as if silently insisting he shouldn't walk away. The protagonist swallowed. "Your daughter said you were late."
I was.
The man didn't hide it. "And I shouldn't have been, but I didn't want you to think the date was fake, or that I changed my mind." He straight up, trying to look composed and failing. "I know I messed up, but this is the first time I've tried something like this in years." Something in the protagonist tightened. First time in years. The words hit too close. You didn't want them to matter, but they did. "You don't even know me," the protagonist said quietly. The man nodded. "Not yet, but I wanted to. I still want to." It should have been easy to step away, to say not interested, apologize for the misunderstanding and escape. But the twins were holding one sleeve each, their small hands warm and steady. They weren't begging with words, they were begging with the kind of instinct children had when they sensed hope slipping away. The father looked at them, then back at the protagonist. "They heard about you for days," he said softly. "I shouldn't tell you that, but it's the truth. They were excited, and when I was late, they panicked." The protagonist tried to ignore the sting of that. He'd been the one panicking not long ago, thinking he'd been stood up, thinking he'd been stupid for trying again. "Why send them ahead?" the protagonist asked. "I didn't," the man admitted. "They ran. They thought I wasn't coming." He rubbed his forehead. "And maybe that's on me. Maybe I've let down too many times lately." A tiny voice whispered, "We didn't want him to lose you." It wasn't a logical sentence. It wasn't even accurate. They'd never met. But something about it cracked the protagonist's resistance. Not fully, not safely, but enough to stop him from walking away. He took a breath he didn't feel ready for. "Okay," he said slowly. "Talk. Just talk." Relief washed across the father's face like something heavy had finally been set down. "Thank you," he murmured. "Just, thank you." The protagonist didn't reply. He didn't trust his voice. Not with so many old fears rising in the back of his mind. Fears of being misled. Fears of being the only one invested. Fears of repeating every mistake that had scarred him. But the twins still held on. The father still stood there, trying, fumbling, hoping, and the protagonist against every instinct stayed. He didn't know yet if that was courage, or the start of another heartbreak. He didn't sit fully. He stayed half on, half off the chair, the kind of posture that kept one foot ready to leave. The father noticed but pretended not to. He was trying to talk, to explain, to smooth the chaos the twins had caused, but every sentence he offered came with a thread that didn't match the last one. "I left work early for this," the father said. The protagonist frowned. Earlier he'd said he was late because of traffic. Before that the twins had said he ran from home. 3 stories, none aligned. "You said traffic," the protagonist answered. The father blinked. "Well, yes, that too." The protagonist felt the first sting of doubt, that familiar tightening in the ribs, like his body recognized deception before his mind did. One of the twins tugged on the father's sleeve. "Daddy, you didn't go to work today." The father froze, just for a second, just long enough. The protagonist's pulse spiked. "You told me you left work early." I meant," he stammered. "I meant I left early from something I was doing. Not from work. The child, oblivious to the tension, added, "You said you didn't want to be alone." Another hit. Clean, unfiltered, unintentional. The father quietly said their names to hush them, but they kept talking with the innocence only children had. "You said you wanted today to be special," the other twin said. He forced a smile. "They're just excited." But the protagonist could hear the cracks, hear the wobble, hear the desperation underneath the explanations. A couple at a nearby table whispered. He didn't hear the words, but he recognized the tone. Pity blended with curiosity, the kind of attention that tightened his chest, because it reminded him of moments he'd been publicly hurt before, moments when someone else's lies made him look foolish to strangers. He looked at the father. "Why are there 3 different stories?" The father opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Silence grew heavy. Not the soft kind, the kind that wraps around the throat. He felt heat rise up his neck, that heavy, suffocating embarrassment he thought he'd left behind years ago. It was happening again. The runes shifting, eyes drifting, whispers starting, his heart shrinking into that old small shape. The father finally said, "I wasn't trying to lie. I didn't know how much to tell you yet." "Yet?" the protagonist repeated. The father nodded. Some people run when they hear too much too early. The words were honest. Maybe too honest, but they didn't soothe anything. They only stirred the confusion deeper. So instead the protagonist said quietly, "You told half-truths." The man inhaled sharply, guilt flickering across his face. The twins watched them both, confused but sensing the shift. The protagonist's chest tightened again. Not from anger, from fear. The fear of being played. The fear of wanting something real and getting tricked into another wound. He stood before he even realized he was rising. "I need a minute." The father tried to reach out, then pulled his hand back, unsure. "Please don't go." "I'm not going far," the protagonist said. "I just need air." He didn't fully walk away, but he stepped far enough to break the circle the twins had created around him, far enough to feel like he wasn't drowning in someone else's unfinished story. And for the first time since the twins ran to him, he wondered whether this strange moment was fate, or the start of another trap he should have seen coming. He didn't plan on seeing them again so soon. He only wanted a moment to breathe, to pull himself back together after the contradictions and the stares. But as he stepped away, he heard small footsteps behind him, soft, careful ones, like the twins were afraid he might vanish if they made too much noise. "Are you mad at us?" one of them asked. He turned, surprised by how different their voices sounded without their father hovering nearby. Softer, unsure, the kind of tone kids use when they think they've broken something important. "No," he said automatically. Then quieter, "I'm not mad." One twin held something out, a little bracelet made of cheap plastic beads. "We made 2. We were gonna give them to you and Daddy, 'cause we wanted today to be pretty." The gesture hit him in a place he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic. It was a child's attempt to create beauty out of fear, hope, and instinct. He crouched slightly. You made this? They nodded eagerly. Daddy said grown-ups don't like surprises, one said. But we thought, maybe you'd like a nice one. He didn't trust his voice for a second. The simple sincerity in their faces softened everything that had hardened inside him earlier. I do like it, he finally said. The twin who handed it to him smiled, a wide, relieved smile that told him this little object wasn't just a gift. It was a peace offering, a bridge, a way of saying please don't disappear. Before he could respond, he heard their father approach, this time slower, more careful, less frantic. Girls, he said gently, I told you to give him space. We weren't loud, one whispered. The father sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, come here. They shuffled to his side, clutching his pants leg. He looked at the protagonist, and his voice dropped. I'm sorry, again. I didn't expect any of this to go smoothly, but I didn't expect it to explode like that either. The protagonist studied him. Something was different now. The panic from earlier was gone. The excuses were gone. What remained was a man standing with nothing left to hide behind except the truth he hadn't managed to explain. The father exhaled. You asked why there were different stories. You deserved a straight answer. I should have given you one. He paused, searching for words. I wasn't at work today. I've been between jobs, and I wasn't stuck in traffic. I was stuck trying to convince myself not to mess this up. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even flattering. And somehow that made it feel more real than anything he'd said before. The protagonist felt some of the tension loosen, as if those tangled threads of contradiction were starting to pull apart into something understandable. The father continued. The girls ran ahead because they were scared I was backing out. They've seen me fail at a lot of things lately. I think they were trying to save this before I even showed up. One twin tugged his sleeve. We wanted him to like you. The father laughed softly, tired, embarrassed, but honest. That too. The protagonist looked at the bracelet again, then at the girls, then at the father who finally wasn't hiding behind half answers. Something shifted inside him, very slightly, but unmistakably. Not trust. Not yet, but a willingness to listen. And that was its own kind of danger, because willingness had been the first step into heartbreak once before. And now, it might become the beginning of something far more complicated. He didn't expect the father to follow him when he walked a short distance away with the bracelet still in his hand. He expected space, maybe a polite retreat. Instead, the father stopped a few steps behind him, like someone who didn't want to intrude but didn't want to leave things broken either. Can I tell you something? The father asked quietly. The protagonist didn't answer right away, but he didn't walk off either. Silence became permission. The father took a breath, steadying himself. I wasn't lying to you, he said. I was trying not to dump everything on you in the first 5 minutes. His voice thinned. I've been raising them on my own for 2 years, and it hasn't gone the way I hoped. The protagonist blinked. He hadn't expected that. Not the tone, not the honesty, not the rawness. My wife left, the father continued, not in a dramatic way, just gone. One day she said she needed space, and the next day space became a whole new life without us. He lifted a shoulder in a small defeated shrug. So it's been the three of us, and I haven't always gotten it right. The twins pressed into his sides, listening without fully understanding. They weren't manipulating anything. They were responding naturally, instinctively to the emotional weight pressing down on their father. The protagonist felt something shift inside him. A softening, a recognition, a quiet ache. He knew that kind of abandonment. Not the details, but the shape of it. The way it left holes in people. I thought you were hiding something, the protagonist said softly. The father let out a humorless laugh. I guess I was. Not because I wanted to fool you. Because, sometimes when you tell the truth too early, people look at you like you're broken, and then they leave. The protagonist's fingers tightened around the little bracelet. Those words hit deeper than they should have. He'd spent years assuming the world was divided into people who hurt him and people he needed to avoid before they could. It hadn't occurred to him that someone could be fumbling through their own hurt at the same time. One of the twins spoke again. Daddy cries sometimes. The father's eyes widened. Sweetheart. It's true, the other twin chimed in. He cries in the kitchen when he thinks we're sleeping. The protagonist's breath caught. Not because the children said it. Because the father didn't deny it. He just closed his eyes, exhaling a truth he'd been holding alone for too long. I'm trying, he whispered. I really am. I don't want them growing up thinking love is something people walk away from. I want them to see it, Stay. The protagonist felt something inside him unravel. Slowly, carefully. This wasn't a man playing games. This wasn't a trap. This was someone stitched together with mistakes, and exhaustion and hope. And the twins. Their clinging. Their eagerness. Their rushed entrance earlier. It wasn't manipulation. It was fear disguised as excitement. A hope disguised as boldness. A child's way of saying, "Don't let this be another thing that leaves." He realized painfully how much of his earlier reaction had come from old wounds, from memories that still controlled his instincts more than he liked to admit. Empathy rose in him like a tide, quiet but powerful. Not trust yet, but understanding. And understanding was its own kind of bridge. He didn't step closer, but he didn't step away. And in that small distance, still tentative charge, something fragile and real began to form. He didn't expect the shift. Not after the honesty. Not after the twins' vulnerable confessions. For the first time all day he had allowed himself to loosen, to breathe, to believe this wasn't a setup for another emotional wound. Then he heard it. His name spoken from behind them. A woman's voice. Firm. Too familiar with the father. And too surprised to see the protagonist standing there. "Wait, what are you doing here?" she asked the father. The protagonist turned. The father's face drained of color. The woman crossed her arms. "I thought you said you weren't seeing anyone." "Not after last time." Last time. Two words that cut deeper than anything the father had confessed himself. The protagonist felt the sting instantly. That old familiar collapse inside the chest. The one that comes when you realize you opened your heart a crack and someone slipped a lie through it. The father stepped forward quickly. "It's not what you think." "Really?" she said. "Because last week you told me you were taking a break from dating. You said you weren't ready. And now you're here with someone else?" The protagonist froze. Last week. He had been told this blind date was planned for 2 days. 2 days, not 7. The father reached out, panicked. "It's complicated." The protagonist stepped back. "You said this was your first try in years." It was, the father said, but his voice cracked on the second word. The twins grabbed onto him, sensing dread. Daddy, what's wrong?" The woman sighed, looking at the protagonist with pity. "He gets overwhelmed. He jumps in too fast. Then he crashes. He did the same thing with me." The protagonist's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a lie. This was a pattern. And he'd walked straight into it. He felt exposed, stupid, humiliated for believing he'd been told the truth. The bracelet felt heavier in his hand, like a reminder of how quickly he'd softened. The father tried again. "I wasn't lying. I just didn't want to bring up everything." "That's the problem," the woman said sharply. "You never bring up everything." The protagonist swallowed hard. "You told me you hadn't dated in years." "I haven't," the father said weakly. "Not really. Not really." The words slipped out, small but sharp. He remembered every contradiction, every half-story, every moment that didn't line up. And now, a new detail he wasn't even meant to hear. "Why didn't you tell me?" the protagonist whispered. The father opened his mouth, but no explanation came out. Only guilt, only regret. The twins looked between them, panic rising in their tiny voices. "Please don't fight. Please don't be mad." One began to cry. The other clung harder. And with that the guilt hit even harder. Not guilt for the father, but guilt for the children, who had once again found themselves in the crossfire of adult mistakes. "I need space," the protagonist said, trying to breathe past the tightness in his chest. "I shouldn't have let myself." He stopped. The words wouldn't come. They were too honest, too raw. The father reached toward him. "Please, don't leave like this." He stepped back further. "I trusted you, and I shouldn't have." The father's face broke at the edges. "I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how." The protagonist shook his head, feeling the weight of every old heartbreak sinking into this moment. He had let his guard down. He had let himself hope. And now he was standing in the debris of another almost love. A choice waited in front of him. Walk away before the wound deepened, or stay long enough to understand the truth behind the mess. He didn't choose. Not yet. He simply stood there, shattered, suspended between fear and something that still refused to let go. He didn't plan for the confrontation to happen in front of so many people. He only meant to walk away, to put distance between himself and the rising ache inside his chest. But the father followed, voice tight, steps unsure, until they stopped near a cluster of people who couldn't help but notice the tension. "Please," the father said, breathless. "Let me explain." The protagonist turned slowly. "Then explain." Because everything you've said so far, it doesn't line up. Not one part of it. The father winced. I know. You told me you hadn't dated in years. The protagonist continued. Then she shows up saying you were with her last week. You told me you were late because of work. Then traffic. Then something else. Which was it? Any of it? All of it. People nearby tried not to stare, but they listened, softly, quietly, the way strangers do when a heart is cracking open in public. The father swallowed, shoulders dropping as if he'd finally run out of excuses to hide behind. It wasn't work, he said. It was me. The protagonist waited. I'm not good at this, the father admitted. I get overwhelmed. I panic when something feels too real too fast. And then I think if I say the wrong thing, the whole thing will fall apart. So I say half of what I mean, or none of what I should. That's not an excuse. It's not, he agreed instantly. It's the truth. He looked down at his daughters, their small hands gripping his. They heard me talking about the date. They heard me say I was scared. They asked if this person, he nodded toward the protagonist, could be someone who stayed. Someone who wouldn't leave like their mom did. The protagonist's breath tightened. That's why they ran, the father said, voice shaking. Not because I sent them. Not because I was trying to manipulate anything. Because they were terrified I'd back out like I do. One twin's voice trembled. We didn't want Daddy to be sad again. The other added. Or alone. The father closed his eyes briefly, gathering the courage to finish breaking himself open. This I haven't dated in years, not properly. That woman from last week, she wasn't a date. She was someone who asked if I was ready, and I said no. I told her I wasn't okay. That's all it was, but I should have told you that. I should have told you everything. The protagonist felt the anger slow, replaced by something heavier, more complex, not forgiveness, not yet, but truth had a weight, different from lies, warmer, even when it hurt. You still lied, he said softly. I know, the father whispered, because I thought if I told you everything you'd walk away before we even began. I was scared, of wanting something, of losing something, of failing my girls again. His voice cracked on the last word. The protagonist looked at him, really looked, and saw a man holding himself together with fear and hope and exhaustion. A man who wasn't playing games. A man who was terrified of repeating a pain he'd never fully healed from. I was hurt, the protagonist said. You need to understand that. I do, the father replied, eyes wet. And you deserve better than my half-truths. But everything I feel right now, all of it is real. I just didn't know how to say it without breaking something. For a moment, no one moved. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, tilting away from accusation and towards something rawer, more honest. The protagonist finally exhaled. I don't know what this is, he said, voice quiet but steady. But I'm listening. The father's relief was almost visible. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But it was the first step out of collapse and into truth. He didn't expect things to feel calmer so quickly. Not fixed, not healed. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everything is still fragile but no longer breaking apart. The father kept his distance at first, giving space instead of excuses, and for the protagonist that small act, respecting space instead of chasing it, mattered more than anything he could have said. Over the next hour, the tension softened. The twins stayed close but not possessive, their earlier panic melting into shy smiles. Every so often, one of them reached out, touching the protagonist's bracelet like they were making sure he hadn't disappeared. Their father watched each moment with a cautious hope, as if afraid to believe this second chance was real. They talked again, slowly, carefully. This time the father didn't rush. He didn't hide behind half-truths or tangled stories. He spoke simply, about the sleepless nights, about the fear of failing as both a parent and a person, about wanting connection but not knowing how to step toward it without shaking. And the protagonist, instead of shutting down, let himself listen, not blindly, not foolishly, but with a heart that understood pain because it had lived through its own version of abandonment. When they finally walked outside together, the twins each took one of the protagonist's hands without asking. It wasn't a claim, it was a thank you. A child's way of saying, please don't let today be the only day. The father noticed. He didn't interfere, he only smiled. Small, grateful, humbled. Maybe this wouldn't turn into love, maybe it would, but for the first time the protagonist didn't feel afraid of either outcome. All he felt was possibility. A slow beginning, a sincere one. And for now, that was enough. Tell us where you're watching from, And one moment that hit you hardest.